Hi, I'm Kristen, and this is the Simple Handmade Everyday Podcast, where I talk about living a creative, intentional life. I like to chat about quilting, sometimes knitting, what I'm reading and watching, and a little bit about keeping a cozy, organized home. I've got my cup of tea in hand, so grab yours and let's settle in for a chat. This is episode 86. Welcome. It's good to be back. Thank you to all of you returning listeners, and welcome to new ones. It is definitely spring here on the 21st of April in Southern California. However, I have been told that this is not true in other parts of the country. I'm sorry to hear that. For my regular job, I write a lot of marketing emails, and I have a client that's in Minnesota, and they're going to run a sale that had something to do with spring, and I was working on the copy, and I actually messaged them and said, what's the weather like there? Can I talk about that, that flowers are coming up? Can I, say anything about spring? He's like, no, it has been snowing for 2 weeks, and everybody is so angry. And so, that kind of foiled my copy attempts, but it is definitely spring here in California, and I'm loving it. I'm spending a lot of time in the garden, as always happens this time of year, and we are just kind of working away at weeding and mulching, and when I kind of get everything all cleaned up and I just have one section left to do, then I'm going to really just stand back and take a look at the whole outdoor space, which I kind of think of as a second living room during a lot of the year, and see what it needs. I'm thinking it needs, in addition to some plants, but every year, hopefully there's a few less plants that I need to buy to fill in spaces. But I do have one wall that I want to redo, rip stuff out and start over, and maybe plant some bougainvillea, which brings in a lot of color year round. But I think I might need a few, I don't know, what do I call it? Some, not hardscaping, that would be like the patio, but we have a bird bath in one place, and I have a bird feeder that's hanging on kind of a decorative pole. I might need to move that. It's in kind of a hidden part of the yard. And that bird feeder is now empty. It's only decorative because I learned something, and that is when you fill a bird feeder up with bird seed, you end up with a whole lot of weeds right at the base of that. And like 10 years later, I'm still battling those weeds. I don't know where I can put a bird feeder that it doesn't create that problem, except for maybe a hummingbird feeder. But we actually have enough plants that hummingbirds like that I don't think we need a hummingbird feeder. I think for Mother's Day, I might request some wind chimes. I like large wind chimes that have a kind of a low sound as opposed to the tinkly ones. I've had them in the past to the point where the sun just eats away at everything that's holding them together and they fall apart. But I'm ready to replace that. But I don't know, just some sort of decorative art. Costco had this kind of cool bronze sun that you can just put out there, just something to kind of liven things up a little bit. I'm realizing that I'm a neutrals girl, and all my patio furniture is very neutral. And when I was standing on the grass looking towards the house, I realized really how very blah it is. So maybe I need some colorful throw pillows or something out there. I'm not sure, but this is my time of year to think about that space and just try to enjoy it when I'm out there. I have a bad habit of sitting there and just looking at everything that needs to be done. I just want to work on it and then pretend I'm at a bed and breakfast and that I'm being very non-judgmental about my surroundings. So that's been fun, and I just want to kind of keep plugging away at that. What else is going on? We had Easter last weekend. All 3 kids came home for Easter, which was just so nice. It's, this wonderful, time of remote work and even some remote school. I don't really like the remote school, but it's nice to have that option. So they all came home very late on Thursday night, did their own thing everybody worked from home on Friday, and my son even took a test from, for college that day. And even though, it wasn't really a day off for everyone, I actually took the day off. But even though it wasn't really a day off, it was just, you get to have lunch together, you see people that come down. It's just, kind of like being just a normal family again, where we don't have to, entertain each other. We just hang out together. So that was wonderful. We had a nice meal, and I sent all the kids back home with leftovers, and it really filled my cup. Before we get into the quilting segment, I'd like to thank the Fat Quarter Shop for sponsoring the podcast. The Fat Quarter Shop is a one-stop show for quilting fabrics and supplies for quilters around the world. They stock quilt shop quality fabrics, pre-cuts, quilt kits, patterns, notions, and even cross-stitch supplies. This month, the basic of the month, which is 20% off the yardage and pre-cuts, is Zen Chic's line called Spotted. These are gorgeous tone-on-tone fabrics that you can use like a solid, but they provide so much more interest and texture than solids. I absolutely love quilts made with these. It's the perfect time to stock up. Also, you may not know that the Fat Quarter Shop publishes their own quilt and cross-stitch patterns under the name It's So Emma, and they sent me some of these patterns to review, and one that really caught my eye is called Rockin' Around. It's a Christmas quilt. It's 45 inches square, and it features a very cleverly constructed Christmas tree made up of half-square triangles. It's a very simple and minimalist pattern with multiple ways to color it. They give you lots of great examples here, and it's definitely going to go on my to-be-made list. I will put a link in the show notes so you can check it out for yourself, but I'm just thinking that maybe this summer might be the perfect time to start on a Christmas quilt. All right, speaking of quilting, I finished 2 projects this week. I'm very excited. The first one is the scrap quilt that I've been talking about ad nauseum, called Sunshine and Shadows. It is from the book Quilts for Scrap Lovers by Judy Gauthier, and I learned a ton about color theory while making this quilt. It's not technically a scrap quilt for me. It was a stash quilt, but my stash is mostly made up of fat quarters, so those are practically scraps. Anyways, I talked last episode about how I was not actually thrilled with how this came out, and it has a lot to do with the colors of the blocks made. I love each and every block individually. So again, I think it's a 16-inch block, and it's made up of 12 different patches of fabric, plus background. And I tried, somewhat unsuccessfully with some colors, to have every patch. There's 12 different fabrics, so it's not actually every patch, but there's 12 different fabrics in one colorway. So there's an orange block, there's a yellow block, there's a green block, there's a navy block. And then once I kind of lost my primaries, then I kind of, there's a purpley pink block and a greeny blue block. There's a gray block and a black block. And I love every block, but when I put it all together, I don't know. I just was not loving it. But I sewed them all together over the last couple nights, and I finished it. I just need to press it at this point. I got to tell you, and first of all, what I have to say is I talked about this last podcast, and I said I'd put a picture in the show notes, and I didn't. I did put a picture of the Cabin Valley quilt. It wasn't my picture. It's from the pattern, even though mine looks exactly like that. People were so I heard from some people saying, oh, I understand, you're not always happy with how things came out, but I'm like, oh no, I actually love that quilt. As a matter of fact, I love the Cabin Valley quilt. I'm going to make a second one because I gave the first one away. It's this scrap quilt that I'm not loving. I don't know how to get a good picture of it right now. I'll try to put one in the show notes, but I don't know that I have a good way to take a picture. It's too big to put on my design wall, and maybe I can get my husband to hold it up, but it's not pressed. I don't know. We'll see. But, that's just, it's the way it goes. Sometimes we just don't love quilts that we do. But I will finish it all the way. As a matter of fact, I think I'll whip out that Cabin Valley quilt and send them both off to the long armor at the same time. And yeah, so that will be very nice. Okay, so what I was going to say about that, the Sunshine and Shadows quilt, is that each block is 16 inches. It's made up of 4 by 4 inch blocks, and they're pieced blocks for the most part. And I wasn't thinking so much about how these blocks were going to go together when I actually laid out the quilt. So what I'm trying to say is that my seam allowances were not pressed in ways that were easy to nest. And I am a person that definitely presses my seams to one side, and I'm very good at nesting seams and getting like very nice seam intersections. So when I am pinning, and I'm also a very diligent pinner. So I'm sitting there and I'm pinning together my blocks and my rows. I'm just going, I feel happy every time they're going, my seam intersections are going opposite directions and I can nest them. If not, I just flip one over and I nest it anyways, which gives me a lot of sort of those twisted seam allowances in the back. And I don't find that I'm usually very alarmed about those. I usually just let it go, but usually on a quilt, I don't have that many. This one, it's like, half of them are twisted like that. And that just makes it so that things don't lay quite as flat. I do think that once you quilt it, and frankly, quilting on a long arm, I think it's easier for that to get over any of that bumpiness than quilting domestically. But and once that's washed and crinkled up, I don't think that really shows. But this one, after I press it, I might go through and sort of, how you can kind of snip those so that they can go their own way, each part of the seam allowance. So I might do that, which is going to be just such a pain. But I was thinking that if I had thought ahead and I knew that this would come out this way, then maybe the thing I am having a hard time talking today. The thing to do would have been to press all my seam allowances open. Do you do that? I am not really a fan of that. Krista Watson, who is an amazing quilter, and I once reviewed her Craftsy class for quilt making basics, and I learned, I had been quilting for years, but I definitely learned some tricks from her. But she presses hers open, and she just thinks she gets a flatter quilt top, which yes, you do. But I just have a harder time getting perfect intersections when things are pressed open. But the next time I am faced with something like that, I want to try to remember and do something like press seam allowances open. Have you seen, there's some new gadget out that is a piece of wood with, how would I describe this? A piece of, you know how you have the felted pressing mats? Well, it's something like that. It's almost like a little hot dog. It's a roll of that sits in a piece of wood. And what you can do is, for pressing seams open, you can lay your block over that. And it's a curved, kind of like a pressing ham, if you've ever seen those, so that you can very easily press all your seams open. That would be a very nice gadget to have. But anyway, so I'm glad that quilt top's done. I'll be glad when it's pressed because that's going to take a while. The other project I finished is my table topper project, which you will see in May. I can't really show it till then, but I have talked about the construction of it, and I'm using the French General line, La Vie Bohème, which is delightful. And I talked last time about I bought kind of an off-white and a bluey kind of sort of linen look coordinating fabrics from that line to do the borders. And I hung them both up and really, I kind of got half of people said to use the off-white, half said the blue. I went with the blue. I sewed all the borders on and went, I don't like this. It just had too much of a 1980s French country look to it. So I took them off and I ultimately pulled out some natural linen, so that, very tanny looking linen, just normal linen, and I did the borders in linen, and then the borders that I had stripped off, the blue ones, were like perfect for binding now. I actually just trimmed down a 1/4 of an inch and I used those for binding, and I'm very, very happy with it. I'm happy with the way I quilted it. I did some straight line quilting. I usually don't know how I want to quilt borders, which is part of why I almost never do borders, but I think I came up with a good solution. So I'll let you know when that blog post goes up in May. But that felt good to knock 2 things off the list. And so I guess next is the Cabin Valley, which is a very fun and easy modern log cabin pattern to do. So that'll be next. And then what next? That is what I've been wrestling with. I've been even though I have been kind of enjoying sewing and, finishing these projects, I'm just not sure what kind of quilt I want to make next or what kind of project I want to work on next. So I just feel like I need a new challenge. When I first started quilting, every quilt that I made sort of represented a skill that I wanted to master. So the first one was just how to make a quilt. It was just squares. Then I took a class where we actually mastered all kinds of things. We did, log cabin blocks and half square triangles and Ohio stars that have quarter square triangles, all kinds of things. But then, so every quilt was just like, what new kind of thing can I do? I've done applique quilts, all that. So what's next? And I keep saying that I love modern quilts and I want to be a modern quilter. So maybe that's next. I think maybe I'll start with a pattern. I also went through a whole period of time where I basically only made my own patterns, made quilts of my own design. And right now I think I'm kind of over that, and I think I need to find a really nice modern pattern to knock out, to just kind of shake things up. And I think I want it to be modern but not improv. I keep playing around with improv, and I think sometimes you just have to say, that's not my personality. I appreciate looking at it, but it's not really my thing. So there's that. I'm also thinking maybe I should play around a little bit with sewing some clothes. I don't know. I say it out loud and I'm like, nah, you don't want to do that. I do have a pattern for a tank top that I want to do in linen that I talked about a year ago, and I've never made it. And so maybe I should start with that since it's simple and I've already purchased the pattern. But yeah, I'm just kind of at a crossroads of what direction do I want my quilt making or sewing in general to take? And I don't know what that is. So I would like to hear from you guys if you have come to this. I have a couple of modern quilting Instagram accounts that I enjoy. And I've even corresponded a little bit through DMs with them about their transition from just a traditional quilter to a modern quilter. And I absolutely adore both of their designs. So that's I'll put the links in the show notes. Shiner's View is one of them, and she did the brushstrokes pattern that I did last year, and the other one is it's like Holly Grove. Maybe it's Holly Grove Threads. I can't remember right now, but I will put the links in the show notes. I've talked about them both before, but they're just very inspirational, and maybe I just need to take some time to explore that a little bit. Before we leave the quilting segment, I wanted to tell you about a quilting zine. Do you know what a zine is? It is a self-published magazine, basically, and it's usually pretty small. So my friend Frances Dowell over at the Off-Kilter Quilts and Quilt Fiction fame, she's a wonderful illustrator and she's a wonderful writer, and she has created a quilting zine. And this one is called Hands All Around. And she also does some block printing. So she has her own original block prints in there of hands. It says, so the title of this says Hands All Around, a Quilting Miscellany by Frances O'Dowd. This is issue 1. And this issue is all about sustainable quilt making. And it is, how many pages? I guess it's 12 pages. And it has some wonderful writing in it. There's a little note from Frances, and then she talks about sustainable, it's kind of like little articles, sustainable quilt making as an act of self-giving. She has a section called Secondhand Stories, where she reached out to other quilt makers online to talk about how they practice sustainable methods in their quilt making. And then she's got just lots of little quotes and things like that. And then she has another article called Sustainable Quilt Making as a Cure for Loneliness. So she's got just wonderful articles in here. And then even on the back, she has resources for where if she has inspired you, which she did inspire me, to learn more about sustainable quilt making, then there's some things for you to check out. So this is printed on some very nice paper, and like 8.5 by 11 paper. This folds in half, and she has stitched the binding with a sewing machine. So it's a hand stitched binding, and it's wonderful. So you can I will put a link to her Etsy shop where you can buy one and it will be sent to you, which is what I did, or you can get a PDF and download it immediately. So she's going to be having more of these issues, and I think it is wonderful to have a voice like hers talking about quilt making philosophically, sort of. in knitting, there are lots of people that write about knitting philosophically, and even humorously. If you've got, the yarn harlot, Stephanie Pearl McPhee, something like that. And I have lamented that knitting is so far ahead of us in just enjoyable nonfiction writing. And so I just, my vote is for Frances to be the voice of quilt makers out there. So definitely check that out. All right. I wish there was a knitting segment because I'm feeling the itch to knit, which I think I do every year about this time. I just have unresolved issues with knitting with my dog, my new dog, who just gets right in there and ruins it. So sometimes I pull out the knitting when my husband is taking the two dogs for a walk. One dog I can knit with no problem. The other one is the new one. His name's Ollie. He's the problem. But I've just been thinking a lot about knitting lately, and I'm still working on that elementary wrap, which I started, I don't know, maybe 9 months ago. And I'm ready to set that aside, to be honest with you. I'm about half done. So it's a multi-year project. And so I'm just like, what else could I cast on? I could cast on socks. I have yarn. But to be honest with you, it was such a warm winter. I didn't even wear the hand knit socks that I already own. So knitting another pair of socks is a little bit like, I'm not sure that's the right thing. And I have talked about before, I do have a sweater that I need the ripped sleeves out on, and that might be it. But I keep looking at, I follow a lot of knitters on Instagram, and I am itching to sort of knit a sweater, but I just cannot find the one that I'm loving so much that I'm willing to invest the considerable money in yarn. So knitting is a little bit of I'm knitting in my head now. It's a little bit of a fantasy thing, but we'll see if I cast on socks in June because I tend to do that. So we'll see. Let's talk about books. But before we talk about books, I want to talk about a podcast that I stumbled across that I listened to while I was gardening one day. I listened to multiple episodes, and it's called the Midlife Matters podcast. And I really am enjoying this, and I wanted to share it with you. There are 3 women friends that host this podcast, and they are they're all in midlife, but they're a little bit different. Like one of them has grandchildren. I think young grandchildren. And then one still even has one child at home, like their last high schooler at home. And then, I don't know, one's in the middle there. So what's kind of nice there, it's nice to have friendships with people who are ahead of you so that you can kind of see how things go. I have my very best friend, her oldest daughter is just 1 year older than my oldest. And even just with that 1 year difference, it's been so nice to kind of talk to her about the things that are coming up. Even when they were little, and things about sleep training or potty training or starting solids or things like that, to driving, to applying for college. So it's always nice to have friends that are older. And then, of course, it's nice to have friends that are in a slightly, different place in their life, a little bit younger. My brother and sister-in-law, they're also kind of similar to me, but a little behind. So now kids starting to go to college and still in high school. And it's fun to just, go back and remember that, the craziness of that as well, now that things aren't so crazy. So I was actually going to bring up their podcast and tell you some of the names of their episodes. So they've got episodes called Decluttering at the Speed of Life, End of an Heirloom, Welcoming Spring with All 5 Senses. And I listened to that, and they have that for every season. And I can tell that one of them is a big fan of The Nester, and so am I, who has the whole cozy minimalist course and book and everything. And she talks a lot about decorating, not just visually, but with all 5 senses: smell, touch, sight, taste, things like that. They've got one called Let's Get to Know Each Other Better, where you kind of dive into their thing: midlife marriage, staying home with older kids, how to avoid a midlife crisis. So things like that. So part of what they were talking about on some of these episodes is I sort of hopped right into the middle of, they have their own little book club using a book called Happy School. And I got a little bit intrigued by that. And so I ended up buying the book and reading it and really enjoyed it. It's a little corny. I will tell you that, but I'm up for a light, corny read sometimes. So what this is really about is it's cognitive behavioral therapy. It is managing your moods by managing your thoughts. And we've talked about this in other podcast episodes. It is all the rage right now on weight loss podcasts. Corinne Crabtree, Katrina Ubell, Dara Thomason, they all are weight loss coaches that use the same idea. And I think that it's very valid, and it's kind of, everybody has their own little spin on it. But the idea in this book, okay, first of all, for Happy School, this is just really about managing your happiness. Now, I'm not an unhappy person, but I do like to read books like this for some reason, like The Happiness Project by Gretchen Rubin. It's just always good to have a good attitude about things. So in this book, Happy School, she teaches you all of these these therapy ideas, this thought work idea through fiction. And so it's a story about a girl who is she's single. Well, actually, yeah, she's single. She's in a bad relationship. She hates her job. She's kind of unhappy in a number of her friendships. Her mom and sister are crazy. She's just kind of is always in a woe is me sort of mind space. And so the construct in this is somebody sends her this little genie in a bottle, and this genie is going to give her these sort of lessons. So that's why it's called Happy School. And so it kind of walks you through this, but you get to see it, instead of it being completely, just theoretical, you get to see how these ideas shape her life and the results that they have. And it's also it's funny, and she often has the same thoughts that you're having, like, I don't know about that. That seems weird, or yeah, I don't think that would work. And she voices that, and then, it all works out, obviously. So some of the thought work ideas that they work through are basically mindfulness is the first one, and the author comes up with cutesy little names for everything, but this one's called the parade of thoughts. And that's the idea with mindfulness. Like when you meditate, for instance, you just observe your thoughts, right? You can think about your thoughts without actually attaching any valuation to them. They're not good or bad. So you can just watch your thoughts, as she says, just march across your mind and not act on them. And learning to do that is very valuable. We can also, as humans, interrupt our thoughts. So like when we start to go down the road of thinking something negatively, about our family or our husband or our children or our finances or whatever, when you can realize, okay, that I'm going down this road, and you can interrupt that thought by purposely thinking of something else. And how you feel is directly related to your thoughts. So you can change the way you feel by changing your thoughts. I thought that was really interesting. And then those parts of our lives that really cause us a lot of grief or we're unhappy about, she has this thing about quarantining those thoughts. And when you start to think about them, you think about something else until you have a designated time where you sit down to work those thoughts out. Like, okay, so I'm unhappy about my finances or the house we're living in, or whatever your issue is, and go, okay, so tonight I'm going to sit down and I'm going to journal about, I'm going to brainstorm ideas to fix what I'm unhappy about instead of ruminating on it all the time. So those are just a few little examples of this, but I kind of got caught up in the little fictional story. I was rooting for this heroine by the end. So anyways, that was a fun book. So what they do in their podcast is each lesson or chapter, they have read it, and then they kind of talk about it together, and each give like examples of how they sort of applied that during the last, couple weeks or whatever. So now that I've read the book, I think I'd like to go back and find where they start talking about that book. So that was very interesting. So that's called Happy School. I'll put a link in the show notes. I think it's Julie N. Nelson maybe is the author there. She's got a number of other ones that follow the same format. There's a skinny school and a wife school, but I don't know how many I'll go down, but I definitely enjoyed Happy School. The other book that I reread, is The Quilter's Apprentice. Now, this is the first book in the Elm Creek Quilt series by Jennifer Chiaverini, and I was inspired to read that because over in the quilt fiction group that Frances runs, she's been posting a quilt-related book like every day, and then people kind of weigh in on whether they read it and if they liked it and if they didn't. And I was just sort of reminded of that series and how much I loved it the first time around. And so I was able to download it on Kindle for like $1.99 or something. So I read it. If you've never read that series, I highly recommend it. So it is about a young couple, Sarah and her husband, who have just moved to this town, I think is it Waterford in Pennsylvania. She had a job as an accountant, and he's a landscaper, and he's working as a landscaper for this company that is kind of renovating the landscape and orchards of this huge house called Elm Creek Manor. And Sarah they've just moved there. They're kind of newlyweds. She's trying to find a job. She cannot find a job. And the older woman who lives there, named Sylvia, she hires Sarah to help her kind of clean out the inside of this manor, which is Sylvia's family home. Sylvia's like, say, 75. And this has been in her family for, I'm just going to say like a couple hundred years or something. I'm not going to do the math on that. And so Sarah does that in exchange for quilting lessons, because this woman, once she's in the manor, she's a very accomplished quilter. So she teaches her to quilt. And I remember the very first time that I read this book, they make a sampler quilt, and I went on the internet and looked up every block that they made, and I even made like a document with each block in it. Later on, I actually bought the book of that. The author very smartly turned that whole thing into a pattern book, which I eventually gave away because I'm never going to make that quilt. But it was just fun to see this quilt that you read all about through this book, like see a real one. And so, I never know how much to give away, but this combination of Sarah being a business person and Sylvia being an accomplished quilter launches a whole new business venture and like 25 other books. So that was very enjoyable. And I actually just got a notification that Round Robin, which is book 2, just came in at the library for me. I couldn't get it on Kindle for such a deal, so I just got it from the library. So I think I don't know if I will reread the whole series, but I'm definitely going to read some. Now, for those of you who have not read this series, what is really kind of cool about it is, so Sylvia has a very long history at Elm Creek Manor. It was built by her grandfather, probably great-great-grandfather maybe, who immigrated from, I want to say, Germany. And so I'm not sure if it's every other book, but every so often, so the books take place at current day. But every so often there's a historical book that goes back in time to something relating to Elm Creek Manor. Some of them take place during the Civil War, where Elm Creek Manor was a stop on the Underground Railroad. I mean, there's just a number of them. One of them, one of her Sylvia's ancestors goes to California to, they bought some land sight unseen. I think it's supposed to be an orange grove, and they come out here. Let's just say it doesn't work out. But the part, there are books set right where I live, which is very cool. And every time I hike at this certain place, I think of a couple books that take place right in that area. And it's because the author actually lived in Thousand Oaks, where this is taking place. And so she set some of the books there. She was a librarian at the Thousand Oaks Library, actually. So anyway, it goes, the books go back and forth between historical and what was present day 20 years ago. And I think I kind of prefer the historical ones. If I had to choose, those are always really fun. So anyway, so that is The Quilter's Apprentice. And the other book I want to talk to you about, I listened as an audiobook, and it's called The Maid by Nita Prose, Nita Prose. And I love this book. It was a quick listen. So it is about a young woman. She's 25, and she's a maid at the Regency Grand Hotel. I believe it's in New York. And I don't know how to say this in the appropriate way. You can tell by the way she talks that she's a little bit different. I would have said a few years ago that she probably had Asperger's. I've been informed that we don't really say that anymore, so maybe you just say that she's on the spectrum. She's a little quirky. She doesn't understand social cues very well, but she's very neat and orderly, and boy, does she know how to clean. So she absolutely loves being a maid. It is the perfect job for her. And one day she walks into a room to clean, and she finds a dead body. And so it's a little bit, I read a description of it that called it a cozy mystery. I wouldn't really call it a cozy mystery. It's not even a real whodunit kind of thing. I guess there is a little bit of mystery about what happened there. But she is very straightforward about, how she handles the situation. And then it's one of those stories where the things are like very slowly revealed to you, where you realize, oh, honey, you are misinterpreting people. And so she thinks everything is perfect, but as a person that does not suffer from the same social ills that she does, you realize that she is misunderstanding cues, and she's into this whole mystery way deeper than you thought. So it's a fun read. It's got some nice twists and turns, and so I really enjoyed that. So that's called The Maid by Nita Prose. And just very quickly, I wanted to finish up by saying last episode I was reading The Forest of Vanishing Stars, and I hadn't finished. And I have to tell you that I absolutely loved it. It didn't fall apart at the end or anything. And then there's a whole kind of thing about the author at the end where I found out that this was very much based on a true story. She fictionalized a true story that there's even a movie based on, which I cannot remember what it's called. But so The Forest of Vanishing Stars by Christine Harmel. If you want to hear more about that, I talk about it last episode 85. But I always like to kind of come back once I finish the book when I talk about them and I haven't finished. And that one I give a thumbs up. All right, let's move on to TV shows. So I just have to say thank you to Beverly, who emailed me, I don't know how long ago, to say, oh, now that you have Acorn, you should check out Packed to the Rafters. And I've talked about the show a few times before, but I just finished it last night. So it is 6 seasons of like 22 episodes each. So it's quite an accomplishment that I have made it through. It has been my sewing companion for quite a while now. And what's funny is that in season 6, I expected it to be 6 seasons, and then 22 episodes. And around episode 10 and then 11, I'm thinking, this sure seems like it's wrapping up. And then I went and found out that it's 12 episodes. So I was like right at the end of the whole thing. They ended it very well. I mean, how do you end a show that's been where you're just involved in these people's lives for 6 years? So I've talked about the show before, but very quickly, it's about a couple who they're supposed to be empty nesters. Their kids are all moving out and moving on with their lives, and then things happen, and basically almost everybody moves home. People just rotate through that house, so they are packed, and it's a small little house, and you just really get to know this family. And it's just delightful. It took some weird turns here and there. And I was actually really glad this last season was short, because I'm like, okay, I'm kind of ready for the show to be over. So I finished it up. I have good things to say about it. And now, last year in 2021, they came out with Back to the Rafters, which is 6 years later. They did a reboot of it. And so I just went from the end of one show. I'm like, okay, I got to see where everybody is 6 years later. And so I just watched a few minutes of that. So that's fun. So that's another little something to look forward to. So that's Packed to the Rafters and Back to the Rafters. And my husband and I started watching Discovery, the Star Trek show. And that, I think it's a season 4. And I don't know. I have loved this show. I'm not super loving it this season, to be honest with you. The one thing I do love about the show is how so many women are portrayed in leadership roles, and they are strong women, and there's a ton of diversity. They have gay characters, they have trans characters. There was one scene of all the highest women, highest people of, basically Starfleet, and they were all women. I'm just like, this is awesome. I just have not really loved the storylines this season. So, I will continue it, but I'm not super loving it. I'm anxious to get on to Picard, which is also on Paramount Plus, now that we have that. So that'll be next. And I'm having I miss Yellowstone, which is, I cannot even believe. So I'm having withdrawal from Yellowstone. So there is also the prequel to Yellowstone called 1883. So I think I'm going to have to watch that. But no one is more surprised than me that I'm missing Yellowstone. So that's kind of it on the TV. Not a lot of new shows to review for you. Before we head into our last segment, I'd like to thank Silk and Sonder for sponsoring the podcast. Silk and Sonder is a monthly journal subscription where every month you get a new journal, and it has a new theme and a new color scheme, and it has new prompts. So what's so wonderful about the Silk and Sonder journals is there are elements that stay the same every single month. Places for you to reflect on what went well and what your challenges were from the month before. And it gives you space to set your intentions for the coming month. It has all your normal monthly layouts, weekly layouts, things like that, places for you to plan out your week, and then a place for you to actually put in your to-do lists for each day of the week. Or I'm using those as to-do lists right now. I've also used those as kind of a diary of just things to remember from that day. And then there's a coloring page, there is a recipe, and then there are specific journal prompts that go with each theme. So in April 2022, the theme is Radiance, and there are all sorts of prompts to help you kind of dig into that, to give your journaling a backbone. Sometimes what I've heard from people is, I'd like to journal, but I don't know what to say. So if you just don't want to rehash your day, but kind of dig into what you're thinking and how you're feeling about things, these types of prompts are exactly that. I'm opening my journal up right now, and there is a great recipe for jackfruit carnitas. There's a place to create your own self-care bingo. There's a place to do some sketches. And then there's some Radiance journal prompts. There's a gratitude log and a sleep tracker and lots of blank pages to do your own free-form journaling as well. So I love it. I think it just is a really good way to take care of yourself mentally and to just spend a little time doing something just for you. So if you would like to give it a try, go over to the show notes, and I've got a link and a code of SHE15, SHE15, to get you 15% off any subscription. And if you are using the Silk and Sonder journal, I'd love to hear from you. Tell me what you love about it. I don't know about you, but this time of year, spring, or if you are in the Southern Hemisphere, fall, same vibes really, that change of season, it's just making me want to dig in, reorganize, freshen up, things like that. I have been struggling with my cleaning routine for a while. I am very good about knocking out a weekly kind of what I want to call a surface clean, the Flylady would call the weekly home blessing. And that only works if every once in a while you circle back and do some of the deeper stuff. And I just have not wanted to do the deeper stuff. And so, as I've talked about before, the Flylady Method is, once a week you go in there and you give the bathrooms a wipe down and sweep the floor and dust and that kind of thing. And I've been doing that on Saturdays, and it takes me a couple of hours, and it's not that big of a deal. My husband, now that the kids are gone and I can't make them do chores, my husband has stepped up and he does some of them too, which is very nice. But so I would do that on Saturdays, and every week I would think, okay, I'm going to do my zone cleaning 15 minutes a day. So I'm this will be the week for the family room, and so I will get in there and I'll do some more deep dusting, and I'll do a little better polish on the furniture. I'll straighten out some drawers, things like that. And then the reality is that after I'm done working, even if it's like 3 o'clock, I think I should be able to do that at 3 o'clock. I just wouldn't do it. And so I'm like, I need to do this a little differently. So I decided to split up those chores over the week, because doing those chores, for me, dusting, sweeping, cleaning the bathrooms, that I've been doing that like that for so many years. I can put on an audiobook and I can completely do that on autopilot. So what I've decided to do is now every day I have a reminder set on my phone at 3 o'clock that says do daily chore. So on Mondays, I clean the bathrooms. It doesn't take me longer than 20 or 30 minutes. Tuesdays, I dust. Wednesdays, I sweep. And then Thursday and Friday are kind of like, if I don't do it, I can circle back, or I can do something different or do nothing. And then that gives me some extra time on the weekend. And this is my all or nothing personality, to go, you know what? I'm going to dig into the family room, and I'm just going to vacuum all the things and polish the leather chair and wash the windows and put a good hour in and feel like I have freshened that space up. And that has actually been working for me. So I'm still like, for some reason, I can dust at 3 o'clock, but you cannot get me to go spend 15 minutes, do some kind of deep cleaning thing. I can't explain it. I just know that this is working for me right now. So I'm kind of enjoying working through different rooms of the house. I've polished up some leather chairs, moving furniture, vacuuming, kind of rearranging, putting away some of the kind of more winter decor and freshening things up with some spring decor, just things like that. And that has really been working for me. And I was thinking, this seems kind of familiar. And I realized that this method of doing things, I feel like there's people follow either the Flylady or Clean Mama. And this is the Clean Mama method. The Clean Mama method is, today we do floors, today we do bathrooms. And I never thought I would like that method, but just the shakeup. A change is as good as a rest, as they say. So that has been nice, and it's I've got more energy on the weekend to dig into those projects. I'm thinking back to a few years ago where my husband and I, I think it was Sunday, just spent a few hours, and we started in the garage, and we did a whole deep purge of the garage, and then we just continued through the whole house. And I think it's time for another one of those, which will be so much easier because it is not 20 years of stuff. It's a couple years of stuff. So we'll see if I can get any traction on that idea. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is a new YouTube channel. It's a new to me YouTube channel that I have been really loving. And it's called, and I'll put a link in the show notes, of course. It's called, the woman's name is Connie Wright, R-E-I-T. Actually, I just looked it up, and it's R-I-E-T. I don't even know if I'm saying it right. But she is a mindful, let me see what her YouTube channel actually says. Practical inspiration for mindful living. She talks about mindfulness, simple living, and minimalism. And she just her YouTube channel is just a breath of fresh air. I also completely love her style. She wears basically linen all the time, and she looks fabulous. She's got short gray hair, but she looks very young. She's got adult children, and she talks a little bit about minimalism, slow living, the way she does her work day, things like that. And it's just kind of a nice, her videos are like 8 minutes or less. And so it's just kind of one of those things on YouTube that I just get a little bit of inspiration from. So if that sounds like your jam, I'd highly recommend checking that out. Well, I just checked, and there are no new reviews of the podcast. Wah, wah. I would love it if you would pop over to wherever you listen to the podcast and give it a rating and or review. I really appreciate that, and it does help other people find the podcast, so thank you for that. You can find me online at my blog, Simple Handmade Everyday, on Instagram as Kristen Esser, and please consider joining the Simple Handmade Everyday private Facebook group so that we can keep the conversation going. Have a wonderful week.